This is SOSF. So, I got my hands on something wild, man. Something that makes you question everything. Get your thinking caps on, because this one's gonna take us for a ride into some pretty strange territory. It's gonna be a trip. We live on this giant rock, flying through space. And we've mapped, what, like, 5% of our own oceans? It's a joke. We know more about the surface of Mars than we do about the bottom of the sea. And people wonder why conspiracy theories get started. You hear all this crazy stuff, right? Flat Earth, lizard people. And one of the oldest ones, one of the all-time greats, is the hollow Earth theory. You've all heard it. The idea that there are massive holes at the North and South Poles and that inside the planet is a whole other world, maybe with dinosaurs and Vikings and who knows what else. It sounds like something out of a comic book from the 1950s, and for the most part, it is. I mean, scientists will shut that down for you in about 30 seconds flat. They've got good reasons too. The main one is gravity. Simple physics. Back in the day, Isaac Newton figured out this thing called the shell theorem. The short version is, if you're inside a hollow sphere, like a hollow planet, the gravity from the shell cancels itself out. The pull from the part you're standing on is perfectly balanced by the pull from the huge part on the other side of the sphere. The end result? You'd be weightless. You'd just float in the middle. So the whole idea of people walking around on the inside surface of the Earth is a non-starter. Busted. Our planet is solid. We've measured its density. We've tracked earthquake waves going right through its core. We know there's a solid iron ball in the middle. Case closed, right? But, and this is where it gets interesting. This is where you get into that what-if territory that I love so much. I was sent this paper, this wild thought experiment from some physicists and geologists. It's not some tinfoil hat thing. It's a serious, multidisciplinary analysis. And they start by saying, okay, we all agree the classic hollow Earth is impossible. But what if there was another way? A way that doesn't break the laws of physics? And the idea they came up with is just, it's one of those things that's so nuts it starts to make a weird kind of sense. They said, forget about the shell's gravity. What if the gravity came from the center? What if, at the very dead center of our planet, inside this vast empty space, there was a tiny, incredibly dense object? Something like a microscopic black hole that got trapped there when the Earth was forming. Or maybe a chunk of a neutron star, this ultra-heavy piece of a dead sun. We're talking about something the size of a marble that has the mass of a moon. If you had that at the center, it would solve the gravity problem. It would be its own little gravity generator, pulling everything towards it. So you could have a world on the inner surface of the Earth's crust, with oceans and mountains and everything, all held down by this tiny, invisible point of immense gravity in the middle of the void. And this thing, this central source, wouldn't just provide gravity, it would be a furnace. The tidal forces, the gravitational stress it would put on the inside of the planet, would generate an unbelievable amount of heat. It would be a tiny, captured sun. A sun made of gravity. Suddenly, you have a plausible framework. You've got gravity, you've got a source of heat and energy. You have a habitable zone, not on the outside of a planet, but on the inside, a world within a world. And that's where the real trip begins. Because if that place exists, something could be alive down there. Think about what that world would be like. It's a place of eternal twilight. The sun in the middle might glow, maybe a dull red, or maybe it emits no light at all, just heat and gravity. So, there's no day and night, no seasons, and most importantly, no sunlight. That's a huge deal. The entire engine of life on our surface is photosynthesis. Plants take sunlight and turn it into energy. Animals eat the plants. Other animals eat those animals. It all starts with the sun. But down there? No sun. So, is it just a dead, sterile rock? Not necessarily. We've seen the alternative in the deepest parts of our own oceans. We've sent these submarines down into trenches where no light has ever reached, and we found these oases of life clustered around hydrothermal vents. These black smokers, just spewing out superheated water full of chemicals from inside the Earth, sulfur, methane, all this stuff. And there are microbes, bacteria and archaea, that have evolved to eat those chemicals. That process is called chemosynthesis. They don't need the sun. They build life out of geology. So, in this inner world, the paper calls it tellus, for Earth, that would be the basis for everything. The whole inner surface would be a network of these geothermal vents, powered by the little black hole sun in the middle. The foundation of their food web wouldn't be grass and algae. It would be vast, thick mats of these microbes that thrive on the chemical soup. That's their version of a prairie. That's their version of a rainforest. Now, imagine what kind of creatures would evolve over millions, maybe billions, of years in a place like that. It's a world without light, so eyes would be completely useless. They'd either be gone entirely or just be these vestigial little things. So how do you see? You'd probably evolve something like echolocation, like a bat or a dolphin, bouncing sounds off your surroundings to build a mental picture. Or maybe your sense of smell and taste would become insanely sophisticated. You'd navigate by following faint chemical trails in the air or water. You could probably smell a food source from miles away. And in the total darkness, making your own light would be a game changer. Bioluminescence. Creatures would glow. Not just for attracting a mate, like fireflies, but for everything. You could have predators with a glowing lure to attract prey. You could have animals that flash complex patterns of light to communicate, like a silent, glowing language. You could even have a kind of agriculture, where a creature cultivates a garden of glowing bacteria to light up its cave and attract smaller things to eat. These beings would also be built differently. The pressure down there would be immense. Their bodies would have to be dense, powerful, with strong skeletons and musculature just to keep from being crushed. They'd probably have slower metabolisms. Life on the surface is a frantic rush, powered by the high-octane energy of the sun. Down there, living off the slow, steady bleed of geothermal energy, life might be slower, more patient. Creatures might live for thousands of years. It would be a world that operates on a different clock speed. So, picture this. After 1 billion years of this slow, dark evolution, something gets smart. An intelligent species emerges. What would they be like? Let's call them the Tellurians. These beings, their whole reality would be fundamentally alien to us. Their entire cosmology would be based on geology. For them, up would be towards the warm, glowing central source. Down would be into the cold, hard crust of the world. They would have no concept of a sky. The idea of an infinite, open space above them would be as meaningless as the color blue to a man born blind. Their universe would be the shell they live in. That's it. It's finite. It's enclosed. This could make their psychology totally different. Maybe they're incredibly communal, because you have to work together to survive when your main source of energy, a geothermal vent, could shut down at any moment. Their version of a natural disaster wouldn't be a tornado. It would be a sudden earthquake, a shift in the rock that changes everything. They would probably be deeply cautious, conservative. Their entire history would be about managing this closed system. And their technology? This is where it gets really wild. It would be a completely different branch on the evolutionary tree of technology. We went the route of information. We mastered the electromagnetic spectrum. We have radio, television, satellites, the internet. We can talk to someone on the other side of the planet instantly. We've left the planet and looked back at it. The Tellurians? They would have none of that. Radio waves would be a completely unknown phenomenon. They'd have no astronomy, no cosmology. But they would be absolute masters of the things that mattered for their survival. They'd understand geology in a way we can only dream of. They could probably predict earthquakes with 100% accuracy, maybe even control them. Their understanding of geothermal energy would be so advanced they'd have solved their energy needs for eternity. We're up here fighting wars over fossil fuels, and these guys would be sitting on a source of clean, limitless power. Their materials science would be off the charts. They'd know how to build things that could withstand pressures and temperatures we can barely measure. They might even have advanced biotechnology, learning to manipulate the microbes at the base of their food web, creating new biological tools and food sources. So you have this fascinating split. It's what the paper calls orthogonal development. It's not that one is more advanced than the other. Their line of progress just went off in a completely different direction from ours. It's like two people started playing a video game, and one put all their skill points into strength and the other put all their points into intelligence. They are both powerful, but in completely different ways. And the scary part is, their greatest strengths line up almost perfectly with our greatest weaknesses. We need energy. They have it in spades. They have no global communication. We have it mastered. It creates this situation of mutual need, but also mutual vulnerability. So, the multi-trillion-dollar question: what happens when we meet? How does first contact go down? The paper lays out a couple of scenarios. One is Tellurian emergence. Maybe they're driven by exploration, or maybe they're running out of resources, or fleeing some geological catastrophe in their own world. They develop the technology to drill up through the crust. They finally break through, probably somewhere remote and geologically thin, like the bottom of the ocean along the mid-Atlantic ridge, or somewhere under the ice in Antarctica. In this case, they have the advantage of surprise. They're the ones knocking on the door. The other scenario is Terran breach. That's us, stumbling into it by accident. Maybe we're doing a super deep drilling project for geothermal energy, pushing technology to its limits, going deeper than anyone has ever gone before. And one day, the drill bit just punches through into open space. Imagine being on that rig. The sensors go crazy. You've just drilled through miles of solid rock, and now there's nothing. You send a camera down, and you see a sky where there should be magma. That would be a chaotic, uncontrolled first contact. A bunch of oil rig workers becoming the ambassadors for all of humanity. Either way, the moment it happens, the psychological shockwave would be unimaginable. For both sides, we talk about the overview effect that astronauts get. They go into space, they look back at the Earth, this tiny, fragile blue marble hanging in the blackness, and it changes them. It gives them this sense of global unity, of how petty our little conflicts are. Well, this would be the inverted overview effect. It would be the discovery that the ground beneath our feet, the very symbol of solidity and stability in every culture throughout history, is not a foundation. It's a ceiling, a thin, fragile shell over another world. It would induce a kind of planetary claustrophobia. The idea that this thing we thought was solid is actually porous, with something unknown and potentially threatening living inside it, that would mess with people's heads on a fundamental level. It would challenge geology, philosophy, religion. I mean, in a lot of religions, what's down below? Hell. It would be a psychological crisis of the highest order. And for the Tellurians, it might be even worse. Imagine living your entire life, and your entire species' history, inside a cave. A really, really big cave, but a cave nonetheless. Your whole universe is the rock above and the warm thing in the middle. Then one day, a hole opens up, and you look through it and see the sky, the sun, the moon, the sheer, crushing, infinite emptiness of space dotted with countless points of light. The realization that your entire world, your whole universe, is just a tiny speck of dust inside something incomprehensibly vast. It could shatter their civilization. It would be like a god revealing himself, only the god is a terrifying, endless void. Of course, the immediate reaction from our governments would be predictable. Secrecy. Total, absolute secrecy. The nation or the corporation that makes first contact holds all the cards. They have a monopoly on the single greatest discovery in human history. More importantly, they have a monopoly on access to the Tellurians' technology. Specifically, their energy technology. The ability to generate limitless, clean power. That's the key to everything. That's a bigger prize than all the oil in the Middle East, all the gold ever mined. So you'd immediately have a new kind of global conflict. A subterranean Cold War. The US, Russia, other major powers. Everyone would be scrambling to find out what's going on, to break that monopoly. There'd be espionage, proxy fights, a frantic, secret arms race to develop technologies for subterranean warfare and exploration. The new geopolitical hotspots wouldn't be shipping lanes, they'd be drilling sites. But all of that, the politics, the technology, the psychological shock, pales in comparison to the single biggest threat, the one thing that could end it all before it even begins: biology. We have this historical model for what happens. It's called the Columbian Exchange. When Europeans first came to the Americas, they brought their diseases with them. Smallpox, measles, influenza. These were common diseases in Europe, and people had built up some immunity over centuries. But the indigenous populations of the Americas had been completely isolated. They had no immunity whatsoever, and the results were catastrophic. It was a biological apocalypse. Some estimates say that between 80 and 95% of the native population was wiped out in the century and a half after contact. It was one of the greatest demographic collapses in history. Not from war, but from germs. That's the best-case scenario for contact with the Tellurians. We would be walking sacks of plague to them. Our most common, harmless microbes could be utterly lethal to their immune systems. And the same goes for us. They would have their own ecosystem of microorganisms that we've never encountered. We could be just as vulnerable to them. But the paper I read points out a possibility that is far, far more terrifying. The risk might not just be disease. It might be what they call absolute biochemical incompatibility. See, all known life on Earth is fundamentally the same. From the smallest bacteria to the biggest blue whale, we're all built from the same basic molecular components. We use left-handed amino acids and right-handed sugars. We all use DNA with the same 4 letters. It's like all of life on Earth is written in the same programming language. But a biosphere that evolved in total isolation for billions of years? It might have started from a completely different genesis. It could be based on right-handed amino acids. It might use a different genetic code, or maybe not even DNA at all. Its fundamental biochemistry could be a mirror image of ours, or something else entirely. If that's the case, the two biospheres would be mutually toxic. A Tellurian microbe wouldn't infect a human cell. It might just dissolve it on contact. It wouldn't be a pathogen. It would be a catalyst for our own self-destruction. Their plants and animals wouldn't just be inedible. They'd be poison. The very air from their world could be a corrosive toxin to our lungs, and vice versa. It's an absolute, non-negotiable biological barrier. It means that the exchange of a single, microscopic organism could trigger an unstoppable ecological plague, a chain reaction that could lead to mass extinctions in both worlds. So when you factor that in, the whole picture changes. The future of this encounter boils down to 3 main possibilities. The first, and most obvious one, is conflict. A war. But it would be the weirdest war in history. The ultimate asymmetric conflict. We have total dominance of the surface and of space. We could use orbital weapons, kinetic bombardment, rods from God to vaporize any access point they create. We could seal them in forever. But what could they do? They're the masters of geology. With their advanced understanding of geophysics, could they trigger earthquakes along major fault lines? Could they destabilize the magma chamber under the Yellowstone supervolcano? It's terrifying to even think about. They could hold our entire civilization hostage with the threat of geological terror. It would be a war where each side's greatest weapon is aimed directly at the other's fundamental reality, our stable ground versus their access to the outside. A forever stalemate where the cost of winning is the destruction of the entire planet. The second possibility is integration. A slow, incredibly dangerous process of trying to merge the two worlds. This would be the ultimate challenge. It would require overcoming the biological barrier, maybe through incredible advances in genetic engineering or by building completely sealed, separate habitats. We would trade our knowledge for their energy, our information technology, our understanding of the cosmos, for their limitless geothermal power and their mastery over the planet itself. It could lead to a golden age, a truly planetary civilization that combines the best of both worlds. But it would be a tightrope walk over an abyss for centuries, where one mistake, one leak, one contaminated sample could lead to that mutual annihilation we talked about. The risk is astronomical. This leads to the third, and what the paper argues is the most rational and probable outcome: quarantine. Think about it. After the initial contact, after the shock and the terror, the scientists on both sides would quickly assess the biological situation. They would realize that their very existence is a poison to the other. And if both civilizations are intelligent and have a desire to survive, they would come to the same logical conclusion. They would have to disengage. They would seal the boundary between the two worlds. They'd build the strongest, most secure wall in the history of life, and they would both guard it fanatically. All physical contact would cease. It would be forbidden. The relationship would become one of pure information. Maybe they'd run a single, sterilized fiber optic cable through the barrier. Through that cable, they could exchange knowledge, science, philosophy, art, mathematics. They could learn from each other, talk to each other, become aware of this whole other mode of existence. But they could never meet, never touch, never share the same space. It's a strange and almost tragic outcome. Two intelligent civilizations, sharing the same home, destined to be neighbors who can talk through the wall but never open the door. Two worlds, coexisting on one planet, forever separate. It seems anticlimactic, but it might be the only way for either of them to have a future. The greatest test of their intelligence wouldn't be in conquering the other, but in mastering the discipline of restraint. So you're left with this profound idea. This whole journey starts with a silly, old-timey conspiracy theory, and it ends up being this incredible metaphor for our own time. It's about encountering the other, the ultimate unknown, and finding out that the other isn't some monster from the stars, but it's been right here, under our feet, the whole time. And maybe the biggest discovery isn't that we're not alone, but that being alone is what has kept us safe. The challenge isn't contact, it's containment. The wisdom isn't in opening the door, but in recognizing that some doors are meant to stay closed. It just leaves you with one final, brain-bending thought to chew on, doesn't it? If an ancient, intelligent, and technologically advanced civilization could exist right beneath us, and if the most logical survival strategy for them, after assessing the risks, is to remain completely hidden and avoid contact at all costs, who's to say they haven't already made that decision a long, long time ago? What if the reason we feel so alone in the universe is because the neighbors are smart enough to keep the curtains drawn? See you next time.